Welcome to What Would You Choose? Your daily dose of fun choices. Owl versus chick. Which one is awake at night? Island versus desert. Which one is surrounded by water? Sponge versus toothbrush. Which one do you use to clean dishes? Swan versus penguin. Which one can fly? Ferris wheel versus carousel. Which one goes high in the sky? Cricket bat versus volleyball. Which one is used with a net? Speedboat versus sailboat. Which one uses wind to move? Tiger versus leopard. Which one has stripes? Gorilla versus monkey. Which one is bigger? Truck versus taxi. Which one carries heavy goods? Magic wand versus coin. Which one do magicians use? Guitar versus saxophone. Which one has strings? Orange versus peach. Which one is more juicy? Squirrel versus owl. Which one hides nuts? Bricks versus puzzle pieces. Which one do you use to solve? Dartboard versus bowling pins. Which one do you throw at? Mushroom versus acorn. Which one is a fungus? Grape juice versus cherry juice. Which one is made from purple fruits? Sled versus skateboard. Which one rolls on a road? Paw prints versus footprints. Which one belongs to animals? UFO versus rocket. Which one is real? Snail versus butterfly. Which one starts as a caterpillar? Ice versus sponge. Which one melts? Sheep versus goat. Which one gives us wool? Fishing rod versus kite. Which one goes up in the sky? Cricket versus frog. Which one sings at night? Bull versus pig. Which one has horns? Microphone versus headphones. Which one do singers use to sing? Karate versus wrestling. Which one is a martial art? Door versus window. Which one do you open to walk through? Mittens versus socks. Which one do you wear on your feet? Cupcake versus cookie. Which one is soft and has frosting? Camel versus llama. Which one has a hump? Cake versus pudding. Which one is baked? Alien versus zombie. Which one is from space? Compass versus clock. Which one tells direction? Chicken versus chick. Which one hatches from an egg? Ribbon versus confetti. Which one ties things? Tower versus Eiffel Tower. Which one is in Paris? Bat versus bee. Which one flies at night? Ice cream versus noodles. Which one melts when it's hot? Thanks for watching. Please subscribe Scene Doll Kids for more Would You Rather quizzes like that.